Do your thing.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Final Fantasy Theory. I really hope you enjoy this first video. Today's theory, Jenova is none other than Yunalesca herself. I'm going to give some background information on both characters in their respective games, and then connect the dots that lead me to believe they are actually the same person. Jenova is one of the main antagonists of Final Fantasy VII. She is described as a calamity that struck the planet, also known as Gaia, 2,000 years before the events of 7. It was said that she used the memories of those on the planet to manipulate them and take the shape of what was familiar to them so she could take over and consume the life stream of the world. Jenova's ultimate goal is to take the life energy of a planet and then sail the cosmos looking for another world using the decayed husk of the world she just destroyed. Jenova meets her supposed end in the events of Final Fantasy VII, Evan Children, when the last Sephiroth clone / remnant is killed. Next up, Yunalesca. She is from Final Fantasy X and is a powerful summoner from Zanarkand, the Machina city that was destroyed 1,000 years before the events of Final Fantasy X. Yunalesca is known for creating the final summoning to stop her father Yevon, who created the ultimate Aeon known as Sin, which destroyed all large cities and protected the summoners who were keeping the memory of Zanarkand alive. Whether that was always her plan to create the final summoning, or she just realized her father lost control of Sin, isn't quite clear. The final summoning, which Yunalesca developed, was strong enough to defeat Sin, but at a great cost, it would kill the summoner who used it. Because of Yunalesca's attachment to the world, she ended up living on as an Onsent, a monster that's able to retain their original form, their mind, and their memories. 1,000 years later, Yunalesca is confronted by Summoner Yuna and her guardians, and they fight her. The game leads you to believe Yunalesca is killed and becomes no more, but this is contrary to the in-game lore. The Onsent can only be sent to the far plane, which is the life energy of the planet, by a summoner, or if they choose to send themselves. At least with Unsent who are powerful enough to retain their original form. We see this because one of the primary antagonists of 10, Seymour Guado, is killed multiple times, and it is only when Yuna is able to finally send him that he is no more. Yunalesca would never have accepted death, as she believed only her way could bring peace to Spira, even if only for a small amount of time, and at no point does Yuna actually send her. In 10, you do see Yunalesca again in the dungeon below Bavel, but it's with Zayon, and it could possibly just be a memory. There's no actual dialogue, so it's uncertain. With that out of the way, I'm going to explain why these characters are actually the same person. In Final Fantasy X-2, we see a character named Shinra from the Al Bhed people. Shinra has blonde hair, and supposedly blue or green eyes. It's not certain because he wears a mask, but all Al Bhed seem to have blue or green eyes. Exactly like the Shinra family of Final Fantasy VII. Shinra also tells the party he is looking for a way to harness the power of the far plane, which is the life energy of that planet, to power up the society for people. In the remake of Final Fantasy VII, there's actually a picture of the earliest Shinra Electric Power Company employees, and we can actually see a masked member of Shinra, and that mask is identical to the mask worn by the Al Bhed, specifically Shinra from Final Fantasy X-2. Given the technology in Final Fantasy X-2, it's not hard to believe that they actually developed spaceships shortly after the invention of the large airships they had just 2 years after 10. My theory is this. Yunalesca began to absorb the power of the far plane so she could eliminate everyone who rejected her and the religion she built in the wake of the great Machina Mar. Seymour Guado, on multiple occasions, gathered energy from the far plane to make superior forms. Sin itself is armor made from the dead of the far plane. We can see that too much power can cause a lot of strain on the mind, and a person will go mad. That is what happened to Yevon, Yunalesca's father. The people of Spira, seeing what was happening, worked with the Al Bhed and escaped to get to a new world. After Yunalesca absorbed the last bit of energy from the planet of Spira, she would follow after her people. There would be a nice large gap in time between this because of how long it would take for Yunalesca to actually absorb the life of the planet, as Jenova was consuming the life of Gaia for 2,000 years, and the planet was reasonably okay, though it is possible Jenova was kind of in a hibernation. This would give the people on Spira, who were now in Gaia, to survive and start a new life. They would encounter the native people of Gaia, the people who dwell in the mountains, the Wutai, and those in Cosmo Canyon. The native inhabitants of Gaia have no actual magic ability, as we can see when Sephiroth states to Zack in the Shinra Mansion that they had no actual magic or ability to commune with the planet. But because there were summoners and mages from Spira, they would actually be able to commune with the planet, and they would use this power to gift the people that they would meet in Gaia. They would share their knowledge with the people of Gaia in the form of materia, which are orbs that contain the knowledge of spells and summons from the Cetra. Materia seems to be as same as Final Fantasy X's spheres, and in turn they would be accepted from these gifts. Spheres in Final Fantasy X and X-2 contain memories and even the strong spirits of warriors in the past. This is identical to what Sephiroth says when he says materia contains the knowledge of the ancients. The Al Bhed would continue to work on technological development, and those who had the ability to be summoners or mages would continue to work with the planet and care for it in better ways than they did with Spira. Sometime later, Yunalesca would finally find Gaia after many generations had passed. She would crash into Gaia with a small remnants of Spira left and cause a massive wound in the northern part of the world. The former summoners of Spira, now called the Cetra, would investigate this wound in the planet. Yunalesca, who would now be mad because she took on too much power from the far plane, would forget who she was and would only know the last thought that she had, which was to consume all life energy. She would live only to corrupt and destroy worlds. It was all she knew, just like Yu Yevon only knew how to summon after he went mad. Using her power, she would conjure whatever form she needed for the Cetra to trust her. Once they were with her long enough, she would possess many of the Cetra and force them to fight for her and against the people, both Cetra and native. The remaining summoners, with the power and knowledge of what Jenova was, called on the Aeons of old, who would be sealed inside spheres, also known as materia, back on Spira to prevent them from being absorbed by Yunalesca. Using this new power, they would fight back against Jenova and create new Aeons to combat her. Yunalesca, now called Jenova by the Cetra and people of Gaia, would be too powerful even for Aeons of old. She would be close to getting what she wanted, but the summoners would pool their power one last time to create the final summoning. The knowledge to do so likely survived in Zanarkand, and after the fall of the Yu Yevon religion, we saw people searching in Zanarkand for artifacts and more. It is highly likely that the way to create the final Aeon would actually be there in some form. The Cetra would choose 13 of their strongest warriors and make them into the final summoning, Knights of the Round, and they would defeat Jenova. With being weakened by such a powerful summon, Jenova had no choice but to hide, but not before creating her own materia, the Black Materia. By shedding some of her own knowledge and will, she would create the ability for someone she could one day manipulate to summon Meteor, a powerful magic and summon honestly that would create a new wound one day, so Jenova could finish her desire to consume the life of the planet. Only the ancients knew of the Black Materia, not even Shinra knew, and yet Sephiroth knew exactly what and where it was. This is likely because of Jenova. The summoners and mages would seal her inside the crater of the planet, and using their ability to commune with the planet, create the 5 weapons that would come to the planet's aid should Jenova be released again, and the 6th failsafe weapon, known as Omega, should the lifestream need to be saved from Jenova and planted on a new world. Because of the battle between the Cetra and Jenova, the Cetra would die out over the next 1,000 years until their extinction when Jenova killed the last of the Cetra, believing she was the only threat to her. To further explain the ties between the two, let's look at their commonalities. Jenova is supposed to be genderless, but takes on a feminine form, which does resemble Yunalesca in many ways. Jenova can manipulate memories, conjure illusions, and change her form. She also has the ability to cast magic without materia. Yunalesca was a beautiful woman, a powerful summoner and mage. In death, in her unsent form, she could conjure illusions, show memories, and she had the ability to change her physical appearance and size. This was the power of the unsent. We know she's called Jenova officially by Midgar scientists, but they didn't know anything else. They assumed she was an ancient, aka a Cetra. Obviously her blow would be similar to those of the ancients to a degree, but because she did no interbreeding with Gaia like the Cetra would have, she's not a true ancient or Cetra of the world Gaia. The Shinra family would know what she was because of their own recorded history and use her cells to create powerful warriors to be like the ancients. They seal her away, and when it was obvious she was a threat, as she made Sephiroth go mad and burned out Nibelheim, we saw in Final Fantasy X-2 that the Unsent will cause the people to go mad, and they can also possess bodies. Jenova is trying to consume the life energy of Gaia. And the Unsent and Spira had the same ability to do that. Given the connections of the game made by the developers, the similar looks, the similar powers, and the materia being similar to spheres in FX10, it is my theory that Jenova is actually Yunalesca. Thanks for listening, guys, and please discuss your own thoughts on the matter.